Welcome to this tutorial video from tutormeonline.co.za. This is a microeconomics for first year's tutorial video. In this video, we'll be looking at the supply and demand curves, the causes of the shifts in these curves, and we're going to deal with it by means of a true or false question, and we'll look at some other examples of the causes of shifts. So in terms of our question, if the demand curve for skateboards shifts left and the supply curve for skateboards shifts right, the equilibrium quantity of skateboards will always increase, true or false. Now the curveball in this question is this word here, always, and we'll see why. Now there's the first things we need to remember when drawing any graph, especially in a test or exam. The first is that we need to label our axes. Now with a supply and demand curve, that's going to be our price on the vertical axis, and on our horizontal axis we're going to have our quantity. Now I've already placed the original supply and demand curves, and our original equilibrium is 0, so let's just indicate that our original equilibrium quantity is this Q0. So they tell us that demand curve for skateboards shifts to the left. So let's draw our new demand curve. And we need to label it D1, and we also need to indicate the change of direction, which we need to do with an arrow. And then they tell us that the supply curve for skateboards shifts to the right. So that is this part here. So let's draw our new supply curve. And we need to mark it as S1 and also indicate the change of direction. So we can see we have a new equilibrium at this point, E1, and we can put in Q1. And we can see that in this case, our quantity increased. But this is not necessarily always the case. So the answer in this question is false. The reason being that it depends on the relative sizes of the change in supply and demand. So for instance, if our demand curve were to shift much more further than it did, let's say all the way down here, then we can see that our new equilibrium will actually be lower than the original. So we need to remember, and this is the crucial part of this question, is that the new equilibrium depends on the relative sizes of the change of the supply and demand curves, and therefore the answer to this question is false. It would not always increase. So let's look at some other examples. The first being that of new information. So let's say, for instance, listening to a Britney Spears song can cure our headaches, muscle cramps, and flus. Now, will this information make us demand more or less of Britney's music? Well, unfortunately, if Britney's music can cure our illnesses, we need to demand more of it, which means that our demand curve will shift to the right. So we label it, new point D1, indicate with our arrow it changed, put on our new equilibrium, and we can see that our quantity is now Q1, and the original quantity was Q0, which shows us that we are now demanding more of Britney's music because of the new information. Second example is that of new technology. So suppose that a new technology comes along that improves the production processes for the production of Apple iPad. So production, we know it's going to be our supply curve. So this new technology means we can produce more of the good. So what is going to happen with our supply curve? Well, if the new technology comes along, we can produce more of this good, and we can see that our supply curve will then shift to the right. So again, label it S1, indicate a change of direction, put in our new equilibrium, and we can indicate what happens to our quantity. So from Q0 to Q1, indicate that we have now produced more Apple iPads. So what about natural disasters? So let's look, consider Haiti, which is a small island nation that produces sugar. In 2010, they tragically had a massive earthquake which hit Haiti and destroyed much of its infrastructure and resources. So what happened to Haiti's sugar production during this time? Well, we know production, so we're going to deal with our supply curve. And we know that much of their resources and infrastructure was destroyed. So we're necessarily going to produce less sugar. So we expect our supply curve to shift to the left. So again, S1, indicate our change of direction, put in our new equilibrium, and let's illustrate what happens to the quantity. So we move from Q0 to Q1 and indicate a change of direction. So due to this natural disaster, the production of sugar was reduced, and we can indicate it by a leftward shift of our supply curve. What about power of our unions? Suppose that the workers' unions in the manufacturing sector obtain greater bargaining power, and they then lobby government, and eventually government, under the pressure from the unions, increases the minimum wage for all manufacturing workers. So if you are a factory owner, it is now more expensive for you to employ your workers. Now, if it's more expensive for you to employ 100 people, what are you going to do? Well, you will necessarily employ less people because you only make a certain amount of money. And if you employ less people, you are going to produce less of your good. So we expect our supply curve, due to the lobbying of the workers' unions, to shift to the left. And we can now see that our quantity moves from Q0 to a lower quantity of Q1, indicate the change of direction, indicate our new equilibrium. And we can also look at the price in this case. We can see that due to the fact that our workers' unions lobbied government, and they were successful in lobbying government for higher minimum wages, the suppliers made some of the workers redundant, and therefore quantity decreased, which means that the price of the good increased. I want to thank you for watching this tutorial video. Make sure you check out our other micro and macroeconomic tutorial videos at tutormeonline.co.za.